Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the HOA, which requires me to rent a house from them. The first time someone told me I wasn't allowed to live outside their neighborhood, I laughed. I thought it was a joke, like one of those neighborhood watch memes where folks in neon vests pretend they're the border patrol. But then a woman with a clipboard and a laminated badge actually called 911, waved her arm at me like I was a stray dog, and announced to the dispatcher, loud enough for me and the birds to hear, that I couldn't legally reside outside the boundaries of their association, and that I had obligated myself to lease an approved dwelling simply by touring it. I stood there on the public sidewalk with a bottle of water, a printed floor plan, and that slow-falling feeling you get when a step you thought was there isn't. The block looked like a postcard. Mailboxes in little clusters, saplings in perfect formation, cars clean enough to see your reflection. I'd scheduled a showing for a 3-bedroom owned by the association's rental pool. They keep a dozen houses for folks who want to move in but don't want to buy yet. It sounded tidy and practical when I read about it. The listing said managed directly by the community. The appointment was with a leasing coordinator. I did not expect a uniformed compliance officer and an instant emergency call. The compliance officer's name tag said Marva in cheerful serif letters. Her smile could have cut glass. "You've toured," she said, folding her arms. "The association's visitation covenant applies. Once you step onto the premises with intent to evaluate an available dwelling, you must submit a rental application within 24 hours. No exceptions." "That's not how any of this works," I said, pointing toward the leasing sign with the number I'd called. "I'm a person on a sidewalk. Tour isn't consent, and this is a civil matter, not criminal." Marva pivoted her badge toward me like a tiny son. "Our association is a lawful private authority. We are empowered to set conditions for access." "Sure," I said. "For members, I'm not a member. Covenants run with the land, not with my shoes." She looked annoyed that I knew what run with the land meant. "You came to look. We own the house. That triggers obligation." I thought about my dad, a man who once labeled his toolbox drawers with both words and pictures to stop my brothers from borrowing. Dad drilled into us that boundaries were about agreements. If you didn't sign, you didn't agree. Simple. The same man also taught me to keep conversations with overzealous hall monitors brief and recorded, so I slid my phone into my shirt pocket with the voice recorder already running and let the microphone peek over the fabric. The police car showed up within 7 minutes, which was either impressive or alarming depending on your view of taxpayer services. The officer, Dominguez, was professional, patient, and very calm, which is the exact tone you need when a neighborhood's petty authoritarian insists you can annex strangers by declaration. He asked for our names, listened to both sides, and then asked the question that made the day pivot. "Ma'am," he said to Marva, "do you have any authority over people who haven't signed your covenants, haven't bought in, and haven't rented from you yet?" "We do," she said. "Visitors must comply. If he's here to tour, he's a visitor, and visitors must proceed to the leasing office to formalize tenancy." Dominguez blinked. I watched him choose a sentence from the shelf where polite sentences live. "Visiting is not the same as agreeing to a contract. You can ask him to leave private property if you control it, but you can't compel him to rent a house. We control the street, the sidewalks, and the common areas," she said. "We built all of it." "Is this a public right-of-way?" he asked me. "The county map says so." I held up the printout I'd brought because I'm that guy. Subdivision plat, public right-of-way recorded. I looked it up at the recorder's office on the way over. Dominguez took the paper, and that was the first time I saw Marva flinch. He thanked me, stepped aside, and radioed something short. Then he delivered what I can only call a kind lecture. He explained that calling 911 for civil enforcement was misuse. He explained that I could stand on a public sidewalk as long as I wasn't blocking anyone or trespassing. He explained that if she continued to insist I was obligated to rent, he'd be forced to document the call as a non-emergency misuse, which in this jurisdiction could carry a penalty. "I'm not trying to write anyone a ticket," he added. "I'm trying to keep the line open for actual emergencies." Marva's smile returned, thinner now. "We're trying to preserve community standards," she said. "Community standards don't supersede state law," he said. "I'm going to clear the call. Sir, you're free to tour the property you scheduled. Ma'am, unless you're the legal owner's agent with a specific trespass complaint, I need you to let him go on his way." Marva huffed off, calling someone on her radio. I half expected my showing to be canceled. To my surprise, the leasing coordinator, Trent, arrived with a set of keys and an apologetic shrug. He was in his early 30s, a high ball of product in his hair, pocket square that said he took this job to get out of something else. "Sorry about that," he said, ushering me in. "Our president is hands-on." "I noticed," I said. "If I rent here, will I have to memorize the bylaws like a catechism?" He laughed too quickly. No, just the key ones. Garbage cans out of sight, approved paint colors, no external antennas, and rent on the first." Then his voice dropped a notch. "And, stay on the right side of Marva." The house was nice, tastefully bland, but with good bones. I could see myself at the breakfast bar for a year while I figured out whether to buy in the area. Still, Dad's voice was in my ear. "If people start a relationship by trying to claim jurisdiction over your feet, your mail won't be safe later." I told Trent I liked the layout. He nodded like a golden retriever hearing "walk." "Great. We'll get your application started." "I said I liked the layout," I said. "I didn't say I'm applying. I'm going to look at a couple more places." He put his hands up in surrender. "Absolutely, no pressure." When I left, Marva was standing at the end of the block like a gargoyle, and I had that feeling of eyes on the back of my neck the whole way to my car. I drove to a different neighborhood and toured another house. A little older, a little cheaper, with a glorious pecan tree that looked like it would drop squirrels the size of cats. I liked that one better. The next morning, I signed a lease with those owners and texted Trent a polite "thanks, but I found a different place." By lunch, I had a certified letter in my mailbox from the association. I hadn't given them my address. I had given Trent my number and email. The envelope had my name, my middle initial, and my apartment number and the address I just leased, which meant they'd gone digging. Inside was a notice of visitation obligation, a visitor tenancy requirement, and an invoice for a tour fee equal to half a month's rent for the house I'd toured, plus a threat to report me to local credit bureaus. The letter said that by stepping onto association premises with the stated purpose of evaluating a residence, I had accepted conditional tenancy, and if I failed to select an available house and pay the deposit within 24 hours, I owed the association a tour termination penalty. It also said that, under community charter provisions, I couldn't lawfully establish residence outside the association for 12 months unless they approved the location. I read it 3 times, and each time it made less sense. It was written like they were a sovereign nation and I had violated a visa agreement. I called the leasing office. Trent picked up. "Hey," he said. "I was going to call you. Did you get the—" "What is this?" I said, picturing Marva pacing behind him. "You can't tell me where I'm allowed to live. You can't bill me a penalty for not renting from you. And you certainly can't report a non-debt to a credit bureau." He let out a breath. "I know how it sounds. It sounds like someone stapled words from 3 different legal documents to a threat and hoped it would stick." "Listen," he said quietly. "I can't talk about it on this line." "Then call me at 6 from a number that's not in your name." "Why?" I asked. "Because our phones are recorded," he said and hung up. "I'm not a conspiracy person. I'm the opposite of a conspiracy person. My fun weekend is reading warranty deed language and trying a new taco truck. But even I know that when an HOA employee asks you to call from an untraceable number, something is odd." At 6, I bought a prepaid calling card at a convenience store like I was about to prank call a radio station and dialed the alternate number he texted me from a different phone. "Okay," he said, no hello, whispering. "Marva runs the board. The board authorized a tour fee last year to discourage what she calls undecided traffic. She thinks people lower property values if they don't fall in love instantly." "That's not how property law works," I said. "I know. She also believes that if someone is physically present to tour, she can claim them as a conditional tenant to goose our occupancy numbers for the bank. It's all smoke, so she can tell the association's lender we're at 98% occupancy. She says high occupancy keeps dues low. It's nonsense. But she writes the policy memos, so—" "Wait," I said, sitting up. "You're telling me they're reporting inflated occupancy to a lender?" "I didn't say reporting," he said immediately. "I said she likes to tell people. Do you know how they got my address?" He hesitated. "We have access to a screening service. She told me to run your name. She said we needed to know whether you'd fected," her word. "She said if you did, we should send the letter. Please don't quote me." "She used a tenant screening service to look up my new address after I explicitly said no?" "Not exactly. She told me to run an identity confirmation because you toured on a public day. The software does a soft pull sometimes and shows addresses. It's a side effect. She made me write the letter." "Trent," I said carefully, This is not just unprofessional, this is playing with consumer reporting laws, fair housing, debt collection. I know, he said, please don't use my name. I hung up and stared at the letter again. Then I did what I always do when I feel steam building under my collar. I switched from feelings to process. I'm not a lawyer, but I work with contracts for a living. I know the shape of enforceable promises, and this wasn't one. I also know that if someone who is not your creditor threatens to report you for a debt that doesn't exist, you use certified mail, not passion. You also copy the right people. I sat down and drafted a response. First, I rejected the alleged obligation in plain English. Second, I demanded they cease any consumer reporting, reminded them that they cannot furnish information they know or have reason to know is inaccurate, and that any furnishing would obligate them to note the dispute at minimum. Third, I asked for the statutory basis for their claim that they could lawfully restrict my residence outside their boundary, and requested a copy of any recorded instrument that gave them authority over non-members. Fourth, I demanded to know how they obtained my new address and under what permissible purpose. Fifth, I told them further contact about this alleged debt should go through writing only. I sent it certified return receipt. Then I made a second envelope. This one went to the state's real estate division, the Consumer Protection Unit of the Attorney General, and the city's code enforcement intake. In that letter, I summarized the 911 call, included the audio transcript from my recorder where Marva stated the must-rent rule to a police officer, and enclosed the tour fee letter. I asked whether an association could charge a fee to a person who was not a member for failure to sign a lease, whether their rental operation required a licensed broker, and whether the use of a screening service to find my new address after I declined to apply comported with fair housing guidelines or consumer reporting laws. I asked whether the association's private visitor tenancy rule was lawful. I asked whether landscaping blocking the public sidewalk, which I noticed while I waited for the officer, violated city code. I asked whether they needed any more information. It was a lot of stamps. It also felt like putting my hands back on the wheel. 2 days later, my email pinged. It was a reply from Board, a shared address tied to the association. It was short. Your obligation stands. Pay the fee by Friday to avoid further action. Your attempt to involve outside agencies has been noted. We will exercise all rights. I smiled. Please do, I whispered. Then, because I have a petty streak, I drove back on Saturday morning. Not to tour, not to fight, to walk their sidewalks and measure them. I brought a little wheel that clicks at each foot, the kind you might see a city worker rolling with a clipboard. I wore a bright orange hat. That was enough to summon a golf cart with a blinking light. The driver was not Marva. It was a guy with a tidy beard and a bandage on his index finger. The name on his lanyard said Rico. He pulled up beside me and didn't fake a smile. "Can I help you?" he asked. "You can," I said, cheerful. "I'm just checking right-of-way measurements. The city has a specification for unobstructed width for pedestrian passage in a public sidewalk. Your community is bordering the minimum at a couple pinch points where the shrubs lean. It'd be a shame if anyone in a wheelchair had to go into the street. I'm sure you know the fire marshal cares about clearances around hydrants too." He stared. "You with the city?" I grinned. "Nope, just a guy who likes measuring things and reporting them." He radioed. Marva arrived in record time. "You're trespassing on an internal audit," she said. "Public right-of-way," I said, tapping the rotor of my little wheel. "I can stand here all day." "You have a continuing obligation from your tour," she said. "You can't just refuse rules and walk around sticking your nose in. Just so you know, the officer who responded to your 911 call said your rules don't bind non-members," I said. "Which means you can't force me to rent, and you can't tell me where I'm allowed to live. Also, your letter suggests you pulled my address from a screening system after I declined to apply. That's going to be fun to explain to the state." Her eyes narrowed. "You've made a powerful enemy." "Ma'am," I said, "I once spent a summer disputing a $38 cable box fee on principle. My endurance is not where you want to test me." She turned her cart and rolled away. I finished my measurements, wrote up my notes, and sent them to code enforcement with photos of the hedge swallowing the sidewalk in 3 places and the decorative boulders that had migrated into the 12-foot clear zone near the hydrant. I left out the pettiness. I kept it boringly factual. Bureaucracies like concrete. By Monday, I had 3 replies. One from the state's real estate division asking for copies of all correspondence. One from the city's code enforcement thanking me, assigning a case number, and asking for a map of the pinch points. and one from the Attorney General's Consumer Unit confirming they'd opened a file and advising me to preserve all communications. I preserved. The first person from the city to reach out was a code enforcement inspector named Callan, who called me from a blocked number at 8:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. He sounded like a person who had been asked to measure too many bushes in too many neighborhoods. He asked me to confirm the pinch points I'd marked and whether I had any accessibility photos. I did. He thanked me, said he'd scheduled a site visit, and asked me not to confront anyone while he did his work. I promised. 2 hours later, my inbox dinged again. The subject line read, "Request for Information, Real Estate Division." It was a formal letter asking for copies of any advertisements, emails, or written communications describing the association's rental program, and specifically whether a licensed broker was involved in leasing the houses owned by the association. They wanted dates, names, and any representations made to prospective tenants regarding obligation. That last word made me grin. I spent my lunch break making a clean, clipped packet. By mid-afternoon, the Consumer Protection Unit emailed a short form acknowledging receipt and asking a follow-up question. Did I have reason to believe the association had accessed my consumer report or tenant screening report without a permissible purpose? If yes, did I know the vendor? I was careful. I said I did not know the vendor's name because I had not authorized any screening, but an employee had told me on a recorded line that an identity confirmation poll had revealed my new address, which could have implicated consumer reporting. I attached the audio clip. I didn't speculate. I didn't add adjectives. I learned long ago that if you want a regulator to care, you keep the spice in your head and the facts on the page. That evening, I sat on my stoop at the new place, the one with the big pecan tree, and watched a gray squirrel boss a blue jay off a branch. The lease came with a narrow strip of grass and a family across the street who waved every time they saw me. The air smelled like soap and cut greenery. If I got still, I could hear the highway like a distant river. For a moment, I felt silly that I had spent this much time on a place I wasn't going to live. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. The preview showed the words, "Heads up." I opened it. "Marva called a special meeting," the message read. "Emergency board session closed to members. Agenda item says visitor control program, legal strategy, banking continuity." She's furious. "Lock your mailbox. T." I didn't reply, partly because I didn't want to expose Trent, and partly because I wasn't sure how to respond to "lock your mailbox." 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo of a community newsletter, or at least a sheet of paper pretending to be one, slid under someone's door and photographed on a tile floor. At the top, "Protecting our standards." Midway down, "Recent incident. Non-resident male entered community, declined to comply with visitor covenants, has now engaged government agencies against us." Near the bottom, "If you see suspicious vehicles stopping to measure sidewalks, please notify compliance immediately." They were escalating. But to my surprise, the escalation didn't come toward me, not at first. It hid inside. The next day, I got an email from someone named Naya. Her subject line said, "We saw your letter. Thank you." Her note was brief. "You don't know me. I live 2 streets over from the rental you toured. When my mom comes to visit in her chair, I have to wheel her into the road where the hedge narrows by the corner. I've emailed Marva 4 times about it, and she tells me to stop exaggerating. If code enforcement makes them fix it, I will bake you cookies that can change a person's mind about raisins." I told her cookies were not necessary, but also that I had never met a raisin cookie I didn't like. She invited me to meet at a small coffee trailer near the Beltway entrance. We agreed on noon, a place whose name was literally just coffee handwritten on a chalkboard shaped like a cloud. She arrived pushing a jogger stroller with a toddler who liked throwing crumbs. Naya was tall, wore her hair in a wrapped scarf, and had the kind of laugh that makes heads turn. She handed me a sheaf of printed emails, each with a date and a subject line like "Hedge at Corner," "Sidewalk Obstruction Follow-up," and "Please reconsider." In one, she had written, "My mother is a retired nurse. She is not drama. She just wants to roll on a sidewalk." Marva's replies were icy and identical. "Our hedges are within community tolerance. Please do not persist in badgering the board." "Badgering," I said. She wrote badgering. Naya rolled her eyes. "The only badger in this neighborhood is the one on the bird feeder at dusk." While we talked, a man with a dog bought an espresso and hovered, listening. Finally, he introduced himself as Laird, which I'm pretty sure is a name you only get when your parents wanted to name you Larry, but also wanted you to sound like a person who might own a castle. "You're the sidewalk guy?" he asked me. I'm a sidewalk enthusiast, I said. He smiled. I own on that block. Here's something you didn't know. He pulled a folded document from his hoodie pocket like a magic trick. It was a copy of the original subdivision plat. On the back, he had highlighted a note in tiny print that said, "Streets and sidewalks dedicated to public use." He tapped the words. Half the folks around here think the association owns everything because they trim everything. They don't. The city took the right of way at recording. I tell my neighbors and they argue with me. Maybe they'll argue less with the fire marshal when he tells them they can't stack decorative boulders against a hydrant. He handed me the copy. I asked if he wanted it back. He said he had a dozen. I print one for every new owner, he said, amused. I should start passing them out like Halloween candy. The following morning, my phone lit up with unknown numbers. I let them go to voicemail. When I checked, 3 were hang-ups. One was, "We'd like to discuss your complaint," from the real estate division. And one was Marva. "Cease your harassment," she said. "If you continue to interfere with association affairs, we will seek injunctive relief and damages." She had the rhythm of someone who'd practiced in front of the bathroom mirror. At the end, as if she couldn't help herself, she added, "And you still owe the tour penalty." I had planned to go quiet and let the regulators do their work, but the message jarred something loose. I dialed the non-emergency police line and asked how to obtain the audio of the 911 call where she told the dispatcher I wasn't allowed to live outside her boundaries. The clerk told me to submit a public records request. I did that before my coffee cooled. 2 days later, I had an audio file and a PDF. In the call, you can hear birds. Then a breathy voice say, "Compliance calling from the association at address. We have a non-member refusing to comply with visitor agreements, and he's attempting to exit the community without reporting to the leasing office." The dispatcher, bless their soul, asked, "Are you saying someone is leaving?" Marva said, "Yes." The dispatcher said, "Ma'am, that's not a police matter. I didn't post it anywhere. I didn't need to. I attached it to the consumer complaint file and the letter to the real estate division. I also sent it to the city's code enforcement because they had asked for any documentation that showed the association's understanding of the right-of-way. It was like flipping a switch. Within a week, 2 white city trucks and a fire department SUV were parked in front of the association's main entrance. I didn't see it in person. Naya texted me photos. The captions were better than any news. Callan pointing at hedge, fire marshal measuring from hydrant. Rico hovering with a clipboard and a face like sour milk. An hour later, they just zip-tied red tags to the hedges near the corner. Then, oh my goodness, you should see Marva's face. The official notice came the next day, taped to the community's welcome sign where every driver would have to roll past it. Notice of violation. Obstructed right-of-way and hydrant clearance, it said. They had 14 days to cure, or a civil penalty would begin to accrue per day. It included photos of the hedges leaning over the sidewalk at ankle level, and one magnificent shot of a decorative boulder snuggled up to a hydrant like a sleeping cat. Someone sent the notice to me. Someone sent it to everyone. Homeowners wrote their own captions. I wasn't on their internal forum, but screenshots arrived from people I now knew by first name and front porch color. The sentiment was split. Some said, "We should have seen this coming. The hedges have been a problem for years." Others said, "Who called the city? This is embarrassing." A third group said, "Why is the board picking fights with literal laws?" That third group got louder when a second notice went up the next week about a missing permit for a security station the association had built near the entrance, an elevated kiosk with tinted windows where Rico liked to lean as if it were a checkpoint. The notice said something about unpermitted structure in right-of-way and remove within 30 days. I haven't loved many sentences more. Inside the association, the response was not, "We should trim our hedges." It was, "Find the leak." That's how Trent described it when he called me from yet another number that wasn't his. "They're asking who gave you the newsletter and who you've been talking to," he said. They printed a list of suspects like it's a movie. "How many suspects?" I asked. "Everyone who says the word sidewalk without an eye roll," he said. "On a different topic, you may get mail from a lender. If you do, don't throw it away." "I shouldn't get mail from a lender for a place I didn't rent," I said. "You didn't hear this from me," he said. "But 10 months ago, our board signed a renewal on a community line of credit. To renew, the bank asked them to attest to rental occupancy and stabilize. Marva decided that if she could count non-residents as conditional tenants, she could claim near full occupancy in the rental pool. She put it in a memo. She had me track conditional tenants in a spreadsheet." He paused. "I have that memo. "I can't ask you to send me internal documents," I said, hearing how funny that sounded in my mouth. "You don't have to ask," he said. My email dinged. It was a PDF scan of a memo titled Visitor Tenancy Program, Occupancy Enhancement, with bullets like counting visitors who tour as conditionals, time-limited obligation to apply, and improve occupancy for financing. It was signed by board president. Along with it came a screenshot of a spreadsheet with columns labeled tour date, name, conditional tenant ID, and status. My name was there with the words "decline to comply" next to it. I stared at the screen until the characters made more sense than the meaning. Then, after I took a breath, I sent the memo to the Consumer Protection Unit and to the Real Estate Division with a cover note that said, "I believe this may be relevant to the matters you are investigating. I did not solicit this document. It was provided to me by a concerned person who asked that their name not be used." I also sent a shortened packet to the bank listed on the memo's letterhead to their Community Association Lending Department address, under the subject, "Potential Misstatement of Occupancy Metrics by Borrower." I did not demand anything. I simply said I lived nearby, had toured, and had received a letter claiming an obligation to apply and a penalty for declining. I attached the memo, the tour fee letter, and an audio clip of the 911 call. I concluded with, "I'm not asserting a specific violation. I thought you would want to know." Banks respond weirdly. Sometimes they never reply. Sometimes they send a letter like a law firm that says, "We have it. Thanks." Sometimes they descend. This one descended. A week after I sent the email, a tidy man in a gray suit appeared in my peripheral vision while I stood in line at the grocery store. He said my name. I turned. He introduced himself as field review for the bank and asked if he could buy me 10 minutes and a coffee. We sat in a booth near the window. He asked me to explain what had happened, as if he'd never met the word HOA before. Then he asked if I could point him to where on the recorder's site the subdivision plat demonstrated public dedication of streets and sidewalks. I pulled it up. He nodded. "We care about collateral risk," he said. "We don't want to rely on rented houses for a cash flow if the program itself is illegal." He slid a card across the table with a direct number on it. "If anyone tries to intimidate you, please call me." Intimidate was a big word. I didn't think they'd try. I was wrong. 2 nights later, while I carried potting soil from my trunk, a golf cart with a light bar crept onto my street and idled by my driveway. This wasn't their jurisdiction. The only light bars that belong here, ticket rolling stops. 2 men stared at my house. Rico stepped out, paused at the edge of my grass, and snapped photos. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Just documenting," he said. "Document somewhere else," I said. "This isn't your property. We're verifying your address. You owe a tour fee. We have to serve you." "You don't. Stop coming to my house. Approach my door and I call the police. Send anyone else and I seek an order. You have my address. Use the mail." He smirked. "Good luck with your friends at the city when they learn you harass volunteers." "You called 911 because I refused to rent," I said. "Volunteer your way out of that." My neighbor lifted a hand that said, "I'm a witness." I noted the date and filed it under "not the good kind of golf." Next morning, I filed a police report. The officer recognized my 911 audio, took the report, promised to call their board, and left a card. "If they post your photo, we may add stalking." My inbox chimed. The Consumer Protection Unit had reviewed the tour fee, the memo, and the audio. Conclusion: an association can regulate members, not non-members. Threatening to report a non-existent debt is deceptive. Pulling a consumer report without purpose may be illegal. They copied the board, ordered the visitor tenancy program shut down, and demanded a list of anyone billed. I forwarded it to Trent. "Time to update your resume." Then the cascade. Code enforcement returned, hedges got buzz cuts, boulders vanished. The unpermitted security kiosk disappeared overnight. Naya texted a photo of her mom rolling past the hydrant. Cookies inbound. The Real Estate Division ordered the board to stop leasing without a licensed broker, prove engagement, and produce rental documents. "You may not condition access on acceptance of a lease or charge non-applicants a fee," it said. 2 days later, the bank demanded a true rent roll, certifications, and everything about visitor tenancy, noting misstatements can trigger default. Homeowners asked, "What is going on?" Rye set a library meeting. I outlined the facts: a tour, a bogus fee, letters to agencies, a hedge measured. Eloise, a retired teacher, said the hedge had twice pushed her into the street. Signatures for a recall filled a page. When the board stalled, Rye lawfully set the date. 3 days before, I got a final demand threatening credit reporting and a lien on someone who didn't own property there. I mailed it to the state. The next letter cited statutes, set deadlines, required refunds, and copied the bank, city, and real estate division. Recall packed the room. Marva played martyr. Then Trent turned his badge face down, produced the memo, visitor tenancy program, occupancy enhancement, and said he quit. The recall passed in a landslide. Naya was elected. The new board hired a licensed manager, froze rentals, posted an apology, created a refund form, and fired the golf cart security. The bank raised reserves and required quarterly certifications. The city confirmed the cures and fines. Regulators settled, stopped the scheme, refund fees, send correction letters, accept a monitor, and train on housing and consumer law. The city cited Marva for misusing 911. I filed a small claim for costs and won a stipulated order. They'd pay and never contact me or approach my property again. Life softened. We ate Naya's cookies under the pecan tree. At a hardware store, Trent said he'd been rehired by the new company. Houses I can handle. People were a lot. At a market, Rico nodded. It's humbling to learn the lines aren't where you thought. I said, lines don't bend because someone puts on a vest. At a yard sale, I found a brass security station plaque from their kiosk. I left it. A glittery card arrived with crayon sidewalk. Thank you for making Nana's walk easier. I filed everything, letters, audio, tags, vote tallies, into a binder labeled Sidewalks and Boundaries. The moral is mechanical. Contracts bind signers, sidewalks are public, hydrants need space. You can't invent debt with letterhead. And if you call 911 because someone left your neighborhood without checking in, you'll learn when not to dial 3 numbers. Sneakers on a clear path, a kiosk unscrewed, a bank told the truth, and a pie cooling on my counter. Friends, thank you. See you soon.